Hey guys. So we are on part 3, The Decision. Chapter 24 is called What Torin Planned. Torin heard the news from old Sal Ramirez, who came in the evening to have the doctor look at his infected eye. They've been ordered out, said Sal as Dr. Hester stood over him, pulling his eyelid down. The cave people, they have to leave, day after tomorrow. That can't be true, said the doctor. She dipped a spoon into the small glass jar full of clear liquid. Tip your head back, she said. She dripped drops into Sal's eye. It is true, said Sal. Ben told him to go. But how can they go, said the doctor. There's no place for them to go. Some of them refused, said Sal. They said they'd fight. He wiped his eyes. Ben said he'd bring out the weapon if they did. The weapon? The doctor set the jar down on the table and stared at Sal. Has Ben gone out of his mind? Don't know, said Sal. Torin listened from his place on the window seat, shivering with excitement. There was going to be a war right here in Sparks, and the terrible weapon would be used at last on the cave people? He had always wanted to know what it was, and now he'd find out. Sal left with a bandage pressed to his eye. The doctor sat down at the table and stared out the window at the flame-color streak in the western sky. How have we come to this? She said, but she didn't seem to be asking Torin. The look on her face caused a little fear to mix with Torin's excitement. He didn't want to be in the war. He thought he could get hurt. The weapon might accidentally get him instead of the cave people. He just wanted to see the war, not fight in it. Where will the war be? He asked the doctor. What? She looked at him as if she had forgotten he was there. The war, he said. Day after tomorrow, where will it be? You're talking nonsense, said the doctor. If there's a war, it'll be everywhere. She stood up slowly, hoisting herself with an arm on the table. Her face looked heavy, and she shuffled to her room without saying goodnight. Torin went to bed and laid there a long time with his mind racing. He decided he would get up before anyone else the day after tomorrow, the day the war began. He would get dressed. He would take a hunk of cornbread from the kitchen and put it in his pocket. He would take a knife, too, in case the war came too close to him. Then he would go down there to the plaza and climb to the top of the big pine tree so high that he would in from below. From there, he would be able to see everything. Chapter 25. Dread at the Last Minute. As Pelton's truck drew near the village of Sparks, Lena was more and more impatient. She longed to see Poppy and Mrs. Murdo and Dune. Another day's travel, Pelton said. We'll be in Sparks by tomorrow morning. Lena was too excited to sleep much that night. Her mind galloped forward to the people she would see tomorrow and backward to everything that she had seen on her journey. She finally fell asleep a few hours before morning, and when she awoke, she could feel immediately that something in the air had changed. A wind had arisen, a warm, gusty wind that bent the brown grasses and rattled in the leaves of the trees. The blue of the sky had faded to a hazy gray, and the heat seemed more fiery than ever. She felt something unsettling in the air, a warning, like the first traces of fever when an illness is coming on. Could be nearly 100 degrees today, said Pelton, but in a week or two the heat will start to slack off. The season's changing. You could feel it in the wind. They started out early. After only an hour or so, Lena could see the fields and buildings of Sparks in the distance. She stood up. She was sitting on the front seat of the truck between Maddie and Pelton, and shielding her eyes with her hand to see better. There it was, and now it looked like home to her, the solid little brown houses, the tidy fields around them. When they came to the road that led to the Pioneer Hotel, Lena had a sudden idea. Let me off here, she said. I want to tell Dune I'm back. I'll walk the rest of the way. She thanked Pelton for all of his help, and he thanked her in return. Take a few of the things you found, he said, whatever you like. She rummaged through the crate until she found the magnifying glass, the magnet, and the little red truck, and she tucked these into her pack. I'll go into town and help Pelton with the trading, Maddie said to Lena. I'll meet you later at the doctor's house. Lena jumped down from the truck, her legs strong and springy, her hair flying in the wind. She ran up the road toward the hotel. She expected to see people at the river, washing, and people sitting on the hotel steps, eating their breakfast, getting ready for work. But the grounds of the hotel were empty, and when she went inside, she found people milling around the lobby in confusion. Some of them were crying. She saw the two Hoover sisters, one wailing and the other trying to comfort her. and she saw old Nammy Prog seated up on a rolled up blanket, grumbling to herself. People were arguing with each other. She heard angry voices and questioning voices and voices full of fear. For a second, she just stood looking, wondering what was happening. Then someone spotted her. Lena! Her name rang out over the hubbub. Faces turned toward her and people rushed up to her and crowded around her. You're back! Where have you been? We thought you disappeared forever! She saw Clary's face smiling and she heard the voices of Friend from school and Captain Fleury of the Ember Messengers and someone who used to work in the shoe store. Are you all right? What a time to come back. Why did you leave? Where have you been? Hands reached for her, arms wrapped up in her hugs. She saw a red head bouncing up and down as Lizzie jumped in the air, trying to see her over the crowd, and she saw Mrs. Polster beaming at her and Miss Thorne by her side. I'm fine, she said. I'm so happy to be back. What's going on here? And where's Dune? I'm here. It was Dune's voice. There he was, just coming down the stairs. She broke away from the welcoming crowd and ran over to him. He didn't speak, just reached out an arm and grabbed her hand. The look on his face startled her. Was he angry? Come outside, he said. She followed him down a passage and out a door in the back of the hotel. There was a small concrete terrace there, bordered by a low wall. Behind the wall, the drooping branches of a dusty tree stirred in the wind. Dune sat down on the wall and pulled her next to him. For a moment, he said nothing. When he spoke, his voice came out in a rough shout. Where have you been? He said. Don't you know how everyone has been worried about you? Don't you know everyone has thought you were dead? Lena shrank back. I didn't mean to be gone so long, she said. It was a mistake. I thought... Nearly a month you've been gone, Dune said. It was because of the city, Dune. I thought the city would be like those drawings I made. I thought maybe we could all go there, all of us, and live there and be happy, she finished weakly. You could have told me you were going, Dune said. I might have wanted to go too. Did you even think about that? I didn't really think at all, Lena said. I just saw the chance and went. But if I had thought about it, she frowned, remembering, I'd probably have figured you wouldn't want to come because you were too busy with that tick. Dune's face fell. Oh, he said. Well, you're right. I guess I was. I thought tick might be... Dune stopped, looking flustered. I'm sorry, he said. I'm sorry too, said Lena. They were silent for a moment. Then Lena said, Shall we forgive each other? All right, said Dune, and he smiled. Lena smiled back. But what's going on here? She asked. Why is everyone so upset? They ordered us out, Lena. They told us we had to leave tomorrow morning. What? Lena couldn't understand. Who has to leave? All of us, all the people of Ember. And go where? Out into the empty lands? We have to make a new life for ourselves, they said, on our own. Lena's mouth dropped open. A wild confusion filled her mind. But how can we? What would we eat? Where would we live? Again, the frightening picture rose in her mind. The people of Ember scattered like fallen birds across a vast, dry landscape. There are wolves out there, she said, and bandits. I know, said Dune. And it'll be winter soon. Have you heard of winter? Lena shook her head. When Dune explained, her eyes widened in shock. All this time you've been gone, Lena, they've done terrible things to us. The first thing was that boy Torin. He told her about the smashed tomatoes that Torin blamed on him. He said he saw you? Lena said, outraged. Why would he do that? Dune shrugged. Ask him. I don't know. He went on to tell her what else had happened. They've thrown us out of our houses. They've written hateful words on the walls. They poisoned us with leaves. But why? What did we do to them? Lena said. The wind blew her hair forward over her shoulders. She clutched a handful of tangled strands to help them stand still. We ate their food, said Dune. That was the main thing. But other things happened too. He told her about the riot in the plaza and about what happened at the fountain. Now, he said, they threaten to use their weapon on us if we don't leave. So Tick says we have to have weapons of our own. Our weapons? What weapons? Dune sighed. For the first time, Lena noticed how thin he was. He saw the shadows beneath his eyes. There's so much to tell you, Dune said, and we only have today. But I haven't even been home, Lena said. I have to see Poppy and Mrs. Murdo. Are they still at the doctor's? Is Poppy okay? A scattering of dry leaves blew against her legs. The wind whipped her hair. The whole world had changed suddenly, just in the last half hour. Her throat tightened, and she felt tears coming. Yes, they're still at the doctor's, Dune said. Come on, I'll go with you. We'll walk there. Wait, said Lena. I brought you a present. 2 presents. She rolled the pack she had carried all the way from the city, took out the magnet and the magnifying glass, and handed them to Dune. This one is a magnet, she said. If you put it against metal, it sticks here. I guess it isn't very useful, but it's interesting. The other thing is for making things look bigger. Thank you, Dune said. He examined his presents curiously. He held the glass up and peered through it at the back of the hotel. Look at something small, Lena said, like a leaf or a bug. Dune rifled among the leaves on the ground and found an ant, which he set on the palm of his hand. Holding the glass above the ant, he looked through it. Oh, he said, look, you can see its knee joints, and even... He trailed up, absorbed in looking. Then he raised his eyes to Lena. It's like a miracle, he said. He blew the ant from his palm and looked around until he found a beetle. And look at this, he cried. You can see it chewing. He tried a feather, and a bit of moth wing, and a blade of grass. This is such an amazing world, he said finally, putting the glass and the magnet into his pocket. I love it here, except for all the troubles with the people. Lena and Dune went through the village and up the road to the doctor's house. It was still early morning when they got there. When they came through the door, they saw everyone at the table eating breakfast. Mrs. Murdo was facing the door, so she saw them first. She stood up, her spoon still in her hand. She stared for a second, her eyes round, her mouth open, words trying to come out. Then she rushed toward Lena and wrapped her in a hug. At the same time, Poppy jumped down from the bench, dashed toward Lena, and hugged her knees. The doctor stood up and watched this reunion wide-eyed. Torrin leapt up too, but not to hug Lena. He ran to the door and looked out, and then he cried, Where's Casper? Isn't he here too? Where is he? But no one paid attention to him. They were too busy fussing over Lena, asking questions and not giving her a chance to answer. Where have you been? Are you okay? Why didn't you tell us? Do you know what's happening here? Poppy yelled, Wina, pick me up, pick me up. And the doctor, thrown into a state of even more confusion than usual, murmured, some tea? Or, let's see, why don't we all, so glad you're... And all around the edges was Torrin, pulling at Lena's sleeve, saying, But why isn't he here? Where is he? When is he coming? And getting no answers. Mrs. Murdo stopped smiling and grew stern. Lena, she said, how could you go off like that and not talk to me first? And just leave that careless little note, which was not, I would point out, true. 3 days, you said. It's been 28. That was a thoughtless, foolish thing to do. I know, Lena said. I'm really, really sorry. I didn't know I'd be gone for so long. She explained how when she had overheard Casper, she thought he'd said a day's journey, when really he said 5 days' journey. And then other things happened, and it just took a long time, she said. Yes, said Mrs. Murdo, and we had a long, long time to worry about you. She picked up Lena's pack, which Lena had dropped on the floor, and set it on the window seat. And you know what's happened here? You know that we've been ordered to leave tomorrow? I know, Lena said, but I can't believe it's true, said Mrs. Murdo. It doesn't please me a bit, but what to do about it I don't know. Come and have some breakfast. Lena and Dune sat down at the table where the others had been eating raspberries and cream. Though Lena was so thoroughly sick of traveler's cakes that all real food should have looked good to her, she had no appetite. Her stomach was in a knot. I can't eat, she said. I'm not hungry. I have to... Dune and I have to talk. At least take an apple, said Mrs. Murdo. First of the season, the doctor added, from up north. Lena took the hard red fruit, and she and Dune went outside. The heat was baking now. They went through the courtyard where the doctor's plant pots were almost empty. The plants had either been put into the ground or had died. The ones still there struggled in the heat, limp or brown. They crossed the road and walked down to the riverbank. Even the river was suffering in the heat. It no longer flowed deep and smooth, but ran in streams between the exposed stones. Its edges were yellow-green and smelly. They sat on the ground. Lena said, It would take me hours to tell you everything I've seen, but listen, this is the main thing. People had a beautiful city, and they wrecked it. On purpose, said Dune. With wars, with fighting. Oh, it was horrible, Dune. She shuddered. Remember, it sort of whispered to me. There was a moment when I could hear screams. I could see flames. And there's nothing left? Almost nothing. And all across the empty lands, are there houses? Some, but they're old and falling down. Mostly it's just fields and fields of brown grass. There's howling animals. If we go out there and try to live, well, we couldn't. That's why some people, a lot of people, want to fight. Dune told her about Tick and the weapons he and his warriors had gathered. He explained the plan, how they would go into the village tomorrow, refusing to leave, prepared to fight. And he told her about the terrible weapon the town leaders had threatened to use. Yes, Lena said. I've heard about the weapon. Torin mentioned it one time, but what is it? We don't know, Dune said. It's from the old times, Lena said. Then it is so terrible that Tick's little weapons would be like twigs against it. The old weapons could burn whole cities. She clasped her arms across her stomach and bent forward. Everything inside her felt cramped, knotted up. Her hands were slick with sweat. There can't be a war, she said. But we can't leave either, said Dune. They sat watching the water struggling along between the rocks. The sun blazed down, burning the backs of their necks. Don't you think, said Dune, that fighting would be better than just giving in? At least it's doing something. I don't know, said Lena. It scares me. She ran her finger over the glossy red skin of the apple Mrs. Murdo had given her. I talked a lot to Maddie on my journey, she said at last. She's wise, Dune. She told me how war gets started. It's when people say, you hurt me, so I'll hurt you back. That's just how people are, said Dune. Of course when people hurt you, you want to get back at them. But then they want to get back at you, and then you just get back at them again, only worse. It goes on and on unless someone stops it. Stops it how? You have to catch it soon, Maddie said. As soon as you start seeing it, you have to stop it. Otherwise, it'll be too late. But how do you stop it? You have to reverse the direction, said Lena. That's what Maddie told me. She said that if someone had been brave enough, the wars might not have happened in the first place. But Lena, Dune slapped his hand down on the ground. What does that mean? How do you do it? Lena wasn't entirely clear about this. She took a bite of the red fruit the doctor had handed her. It looked as hard as polished stone, but the juice that burst into her mouth was sweet. I think it's this, she said. She chewed and swallowed. Instead of getting back at the other side with something just as bad as they did to you, or something worse, you do something good. She took another bite of the apple. I think that's it. One bad thing after another leads to worse things, so if you do a good thing, then it turns around. Dune sighed. Well, that's not very helpful, he said. How are we supposed to do something good for these people who have done so many bad things to us? Why would we even want to? Well, that's it, Lena said, wiping apple juice off her chin. You don't want to, but you do anyway. That's what makes it hard. Maddie said it was very hard. It's much harder to be good than bad, she said. So what do we do then, said Dune. Say we'll be happy to work without food. Say we'll always be nice no matter what they do to us. No, said Lena, that can't be right. Or should we just go quietly out into the empty lands and not bother them anymore? No, said Lena, that can't be right either. She stared at the water rippling by. She was thinking hard. We don't want to leave, she said, and we don't want to fight. Do you think those are really our only two choices? What else could there be? If we don't fight, they'll make us leave, and if we don't leave, we'll have to fight. Lena discovered a tough part in the center of the apple, surrounded with brown seeds. She picked at the seeds with her fingernail. There must be some other way, she said. What if we all just sit down in front of the hotel and refuse to move? We don't leave, but we don't fight. They wouldn't use their weapon on us if we weren't fighting, would they? I don't know, said Dune. They might. I don't think they would, Lena said. They're not bad people. But we can't just sit there forever, Dune said. Sooner or later, they would make us leave. They'd pick us up one by one and load us onto trucks and drive us away. Maybe they wouldn't, said Lena. Maybe we could talk, work something out. I don't think so, said Dune. Tick and his warriors would never just sit. They want to fight. Lena drew up her knees and rested her chin on them. Something good, she thought. What good act would turn things around? We could volunteer to be roamers, she said. A whole lot of us, so they wouldn't have to feed us and we could bring things back to them. We don't know how to be roamers, said Dune. We don't have trucks or oxen. We wouldn't know where to go. We could say we'll do all the worst jobs, Lena said. But that wouldn't be fair, said Dune impatiently. Why should we? That's no good. He stood up, slapping the dry grass from his pants. I think it's too late for any of it. None of it's going to work. Lena stayed where she was, still thinking. She desperately wanted to find an answer, But no answer came to her. Her spirit sank and she suddenly felt tired. Well, then, we just have to be on the lookout, she said. Some chance will turn up. We have to watch for it. I don't know what else to do. She knew how weak and silly this all sounded. But to her surprise, Dune smiled a little. That's like what my father told me when I was working in the pipeworks. Pay attention, he said. It was a good idea then. I suppose it still is. Anyway, I guess it's the best we can do. Lena dropped her apple core on the ground and scuffed some dirt over it, and they trudged back to the doctor's house. Dune stayed there for lunch instead of going to the Partons, and then they headed back to the hotel. Lena meant to spend the rest of the day thinking as hard as she could about the choices she had to make tomorrow. She sat on the window seat sideways, her legs stretched out, and she tried to get her mind to produce ideas. But she kept coming back up against the two walls. Fight? She didn't want to fight. Or leave? She didn't want to leave. A slow fly buzzed against the window. Wind stirred in the grape leaves outside. Think, thought Lena. Pay attention. And then she fell asleep. The next chapter is called The Weapon. Let's see how long it is real quick. Alright, we'll read one more chapter because it's only been 20 minutes. Let's see. Chapter 26, The Weapon. Morning came, Dune got up. He had to be ready for anything, so he rolled up his blankets and made a pack for all of his clothes, everything he had. His father and the others did the same. Downstairs, out in front of the hotel, the people of Ember were gathering and swarming around, loud and distressed and confused. Tick roamed among them, urging courage, inspiring them to stand up for their rights, telling them that the time had come for battle. His eyes flashed with the cold light. His voice rang out like the high, urgent tone of a bell. Very often, the people he spoke to seemed to catch fire from his words and be filled with a burning desire to fight. Over half the people of Ember joined with Tick to be warriors. Some of them had wrenched the towel rocks from their bathroom walls. Others grabbed rocks or branches to use as weapons. They started down the road to the village, and the rest of the Emberites followed in a confused mass. Will you get me a little bit of water, please? Dune went too. The morning sun, already hot, blazed down on him. Wind rifled his hair and his shirt. His mind was in turmoil, his heart thudding, like a fist in his chest. Tick and his warriors, carrying their towel racks, their sink pipes, their shards of glass, strode along, roaring their battle cry. We will not go. We will not go. More and more people picked up the chant as they came into the streets of the village and at doors and window fences. Shocked faces, people still in their nightgowns. They shouted to each other, Look, the cave people are coming. They're coming into town. Other windows flew open and doors, and people stepped out into the streets, unsure whether to be afraid or angry. All the people of Ember had come. No one stayed behind to wait for the trucks that would take them out into the empty lands. All of them had to know what was going to happen. They had to be there, whatever it was. They poured into the plaza and stood packed together, the warriors roaring and the others nervous, some of them half hiding in doorways or behind trees, afraid of what was going to happen, not sure if they wanted to be a part of it or not. Tick roared out his challenge. People of Sparks, we refuse to leave. We are here to make our demands, and if you do not meet them, we will fight. We will fight, roared the warriors. Others looked at each other fearfully. Will we? From a side street, Ben Barlow appeared running. He bounded up onto the steps of the town hall, faced the crowd, and yelled back, What are you doing here? This is an outrage. This is unacceptable. You are leaving today, leaving here for good. We will not go, screamed the crowd. Wilmer, Mary, shouted Ben. The other two leaders followed him onto the steps. Clear out now, they shouted. Back to the hotel. Move back. Move back. They stepped in front of the crowd and tried to press them backward, but it was no use. There were simply too many Emberites. Ben darted at Tick and tried to grab him, but Tick struck him with the rod and he lurched sideways, clutching his arm. No one had expected the Emberites to have weapons. Dune was standing on the river side of the plaza, slightly apart from the main crowd. He had the feeling things were right on the edge of chaos, right on the edge of being in control and being out of control. It was frightening. The yelling, the waving of weapons, the people of Ember filling the plaza and the people of Sparks crowding in around the edges. their faces full of rage and fear. Maybe, thought June, the leaders will be coming to discuss our demands. Maybe we can talk and everything will be all right. It was the only ray of hope he could see. These are our demands, cried Tick. Listen carefully. But Ben just screamed back, We've heard enough from you. We're finished talking to you. No more talking. No more demands. When he heard that, Dune felt a jolt of fury. It launched him into action. He sprang up onto the bench next to him and shouted at the top of his lungs, At least listen! That drew the attention of Chugger, who was standing near him. He lunged at Dune, but Dune leapt away. He heard Ben's voice shout, Catch that boy! Angry faces turned toward him. Arms reached to grab him. He ducked and swerved and wove his way along the edges of the crowd, and as soon as he was in the clear, he ran. But he didn't go far. He had to stay close to the plaza. He had to know what was going to happen. He ran up the river road and darted between the town hall, where a few garbage barrels stood by the back door. He paused for a moment. Was anyone following him? From the plaza came a roar and then a voice shouting, What was happening? Dune had to know. He pushed against the town hall's back door. It opened easily, and he slipped inside. A hallway led toward the front of the building. On his right was a flight of stairs. Surely, he thought, no one was in here. They were all outside dealing with the army of Emberites. He ran up the stairs, and at the top, he found himself in the tower room. It was a square room with windows on all sides. A table stood in the middle, with straight-backed chairs around it. Down below was a plaza swarming with people. The noise was like the roar of water. Tick was at the front of the crowd. Dune could see the top of his head, like a shiny black stone, and his steel rod glinting in the sun. Straight below were the steps of the town hall and the tops of the heads of the three leaders. To his right, the windows were partially blocked by the branches of the great pine tree that stood next to the town hall. When he looked out the windows toward the rear of the building, he saw the town hall roof below. This was perfect. He could see what was going to happen. He could hear, too, because the windows were open. And he realized if he stayed here, he wouldn't have to decide whether he was going to fight or not. This seemed a little bit like cheating, but it was a relief, too. The thought of taking part in a bloody brawl had filled him with dread. Standing to the side of the front window, Dune looked down. Right below him was Ben Barlow. He could see the wiry gray hair on the top of his head and his hands waving furiously in the air. Mary Waters and Wilmer Dent had stepped up behind him. Mary tried to take him by the arm, but he shook her off. He made his hands into a megaphone for his mouth. We will not be threatened, he shouted. We are in charge of this town. It's our place. We built it. We own it. You are destroying our way of life. You have to go. The crowd rumbled. They pressed forward. Clouds came over the sun, and the vast shadow swept across the plaza. You can try to make us leave, shouted Tick, but we are here to stay. The air seemed to quiver with rage, or was it just the wind? Everyone was moving. The clouds raced overhead. The branches of the trees thrashed, the Emberites raising their motley weapons. Up on the roof of the tower, the flag of sparks whipped and snapped on its pole. Dune could hear it, though he couldn't see it. He felt the wind whirling through his mind as well. His father's words came back to him. When the fight is over, what do we have? A place destroyed? People who hate each other? Standing above it all in the tower, he had the strange feeling of being separate, belonging neither to one side of the fight or the other. Whose side was he on? Not on Ben, certainly, but not on Tick's either, with his warriors calling out threats, eager for a fight. Ben held up his hand and shouted again, We warned you, and we're ready for you. His voice was hoarse. I'll give you one last chance. Will you leave or not? His head thrust forward and his hands tightened in a fist. He waited for an answer. No! Screamed Tick. His army bellowed out with him. No! No! Never! Ben dashed to the door of the town hall. Wilmer went with him and they together darted inside. Dune froze, afraid they might climb up into the tower. But they came out onto the steps again right away, pulling a thing of black metal that ran on wheels. For a moment, the clamor of the crowd ceased as they craned their necks, trying to see each other. Dune had a good view from where he was, but he still had no idea what that thing was. He knew it must be the weapon, but it looked almost like a great black insect. It stood on black iron legs. It had a complicated black iron body nearly as long as a truck, strutted with hooks and boxes and points. A narrow scarf of ridged metal hung across it. It was ugly, Dune thought, like the skeleton of a monster. Ben turned the thing so that it pointed out over the crowd. He stood behind it, his feet planted wide. "This is your last chance," he shouted at the crowd. "Disperse, or take the consequences." Mary Waters dashed toward him. "No, Ben," she cried. "We can't do this." Ben pushed her away. "We agreed," he cried. "Stand back, Mary." Now the crowd in the plaza sensed danger and began to push backward. Tick cried, "Stand your ground!" But Dune saw him take a step back too. Ben squatted at the rear end of the weapon. "Leave now and take your gang of hoodlums with you, or I fire," he shouted. Fire, thought Dune. What does that mean? It was clear that Tick didn't know either. "You have one weapon," he shouted, "but we have many." He raised his rod in his hand, and behind him all the warriors did the same. Ben gave a furious shout.